This is part 2 of our tutorial on SQL. We will continue with the select statement and look at a few more options. Now, the part 1, we looked at the member table. Let's take a brief look at the meal table. Remember the select star from meal. Let's just look at the data here. And we see that we have 7 or 8 different meals in our database. If you look at meal number 404, that is the fish fry. Now let's switch to remember 404. And now let's go back to our fundraising event table. And let's take a look at our data. So we have, looks like about 8 events in our database. And we want to find those events that have the meal ID or have the fish fry, which is remember is 404. Remember from part 1 we say where meal ID is equal to 404. Click Run SQL. And we limit our results to only those events that have meal ID 404, which is our fish fry. Okay, let's look at a few more columns. Now we can have some columns that are derived columns or virtual columns. They're not columns that exist in our table structure, but we can derive columns from them. So go back to our fundraising event. Let's look at the event date, the description, the contribution, and I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but let's look at adding a gratuity, which is a percentage of the contribution. So we're going to select out the date of the event, the description of the event, how much contribution we're asking for, and a made-up column called gratuity, which is a function of the contribution. We run this, and we say we have our 3 columns from the table and our derived column of gratuity, which is a calculation of the contribution times 0.2. Now the AS here says, what name do you want to give this column? We're going to call it gratuity, which then shows up in our column header here. If we want to get the total of the 2, we can add another column, and we'll call it contribution. And we want to add the contribution and the gratuity. We can just multiply times 1.2 as total contribution. And we get the sum of these 2 together. Now notice, it'd be nice, but we can't do it. If we said, let's see what happens. If we add gratuity, we add the contribution plus the gratuity, and it's going to say, I don't know what gratuity is. So even though we gave it a name here, SQL does not recognize that name. Okay? If you want to use dates, we can add another criteria to our where. Now notice the where statement must be something that equates to true or false. Meal ID equals 404. It's either a true statement or a false statement. It can't be anything else like, well, usually, kind of, maybe, close to. It has to be exactly 404. It has to be true or false. So let's look at dates here. And we'll say where an event date is greater than 04-07-2012. And see if we get rid of the second row here. And we don't. And why we don't. Oh, I have an invalid column name. Let's take that part out. Change this back to 7. And we see here that we do have event date 408 because it's the only one that matches both of these conditions, where the meal is 404 and the date is after 407. Okay, let's take the where statement out here. I forgot to add my comment. Let's look at aggregate columns. Aggregate columns are columns that take a collection of rows and perform some kind of analysis on the row. So if we remove these columns here, and let's look at the sum of the contributions. We use the word sum, which will add up all the contributions. A little misleading because this is the requested contribution per event, but we're going to sum them anyway. And we see we get one row, one column. So it takes all the rows from the fundraising event table and adds up the contribution number here and gives us this total of $615. We can also do, remember I put my comma here, we can also do count. So we just want to count all the rows in the fundraising event table. And we see we have 8. Notice I did not give it a name, so it made up a name for me. So I give it a name. Let's add another column here. We'll call this one the average. As you probably guessed, it's AVG for average. And we have the average contribution. Run that. The average contribution is $70-some. We can say what's the maximum contribution. Notice I put a space before and after. C-O-N-T-R-I-B-U-T. I put a space before and after. That's not required. I do that just because it makes it a little more readable. And let's do the min while we're at it. And let's execute this. And we see we have the total is 615. We have 8 events. The average requested contribution is $76. The maximum is $150, and the minimum is $25. These are called aggregate columns, and they're aggregates because they take a collection of rows, one or more rows, and they do calculations on those. So let's take a break here. This will be the end of part 2, and we'll continue on.